And for more on the newly signed China-South Korea trade agreement, let's bring in current affairs commentator Einer Tangen, joining us live from Beijing. Thank you so much for joining us. First, I'd like to get your reaction to this free trade deal. Some say it's the most comprehensive deal that China has signed. What stood out to you the most, and what are some of the major breakthroughs?
Well, the major breakthroughs are in terms of opening up the sectors that you've been talking about in communications and things. People should be thinking about this in two ways. One, short term, Chinese consumers will win because of cheaper prices. But over the long term, China is looking for the technological edge. A lot of the things that we're talking about will involve joint ventures between Chinese and Korean companies, which will help Chinese mainland companies get up to speed. The other thing people should be looking at is could be the new template for a Japan, China, Korea trade FTA that's been working in the works for quite some time. And beyond that, the 11-member RCEP. So if that happens, you can start seeing China using this as a way of doing it. What's notable, though, is this does not use the negative list that China's been favoring. Instead, it goes back to a much more traditional way of defining what is and is not in the pie.
You know, we see benchmarks at the 10-year mark and then the 20-year mark. How soon, though, or how long do you think it will take before consumers in both countries can start to see the effects of this agreement?
Well, actually, you're going to see quite a bit of it. I mean, about 70% on both sides is going to go through within a very short period of time, within the first 10 years. I think you're going to see it. It has to pass both legislative bodies. There's always a little bit more concern, I think, especially when you have smaller partners like South Korea, which is going to be looking at what the impact is and what the political fallout will be. All in all, though, it looks very, very positive. Question is, how are they going to go forward and speed this up? There are big numbers on the table. People are talking about 13 trillion. That's an extrapolation. I think it's a little soon to say that, but obviously very, very clear mutual interest between these two parties.
You know, two things that weren't included in this deal, automobiles and rice. What do you make of that? Were you surprised by that at all, or do you see something different happening with those products in mind in a different deal or somewhere down the road?
Well, actually, the rice, no. That's a political hot spot. And quite frankly, it will also involve, as I said, this might be a template for Japan. Both of those issues are going to be very sensitive there also. So given that kind of given that situation, it's not surprising that it's happening with South Korea. If you were looking at it by itself, the exclusion of South Korean automobiles might be a little perplexing, but when you start putting Japan in the picture, it all starts to make sense. And once again, this could be a much larger template for agreements going forward on a much larger basis. It brings into this issue, will RCEP and TPP, will they compete? How will they compete? And what will be the future of these two entities?
You know, China is a huge consumer of South Korean electronic goods. I saw a lot of Samsung phones when I was in China just last week. How do you think lower tariffs will impact China's domestic brands? Any concern for competition?
Not really. I mean, Chinese domestic, for example, in the cell phone industry, they've taken a different model. If you start adding up all the profits that are made on cell phones, you would basically, Apple takes the biggest bite, and then Samsung takes the second. The Chinese make up 11 out of the top 15 makers of cell phones, but their model is completely different. They sell based on making very little on the phone and making more on the accessories, where adding the margins can be quite significant.
Kaesong Industrial Park included in this free trade zone, not seeing it in another agreement, South Korea between the U.S. and EU. Your thoughts on that?
Well, I think this was just throwing a good well-wish towards this. There's 50,000 employees there. Obviously, it would be in everyone's interest if the South and North Korea situation were resolved peacefully. There's always a lot of clanging going on between the two sides. It's important that China, for China's perspective, that they appear that they're trying to create a peaceful solution. So.
All right, Einer Tangen joining us from Beijing. Thank you so much for your time and perspective.